Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever just stared at the news and wondered how in the world interest rates, inflation, and the actual cash in your wallet are all connected, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're doing a highly visual breakdown of a topic that honestly can usually feel pretty dense and abstract: monetary policy. But don't worry, we aren't going to just look at a bunch of math on a chalkboard. Instead, we're going to pop the hood and explore the actual physical mechanics that keep our everyday economy running smoothly. It's literally like looking at the engine of a massive, incredibly complex vehicle.
But hey, before we get into the heavy lifting, let's just ask a super fundamental question. What actually drives our economic wheels? Like, what takes the purely theoretical value of a currency and turns it into the actual goods on our shelves, the jobs in our cities, and the investments for our future? It's a giant puzzle, right? And to solve it, we really need a reliable framework.
To get a grip on macroeconomics, it really all boils down to how three core elements respond to one another. We've got our three pillars. First, there's supply, specifically the supply of money. Think of this as the fuel. Then, right in the middle, we have demand. That's the engine. It's you, it's me, it's all of society deciding exactly how we want to use that fuel. And finally, we have policy. That's the central bank, and they act as the mechanic. They're the ones pulling the levers to make sure the engine doesn't flood with way too much fuel or, completely seize up from having too little.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the macro machine, break down the money supply, and check out money demand. After that, we'll introduce the central bank, review their main goals, and wrap the whole thing up with the art of balance.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, the macroeconomic machine. Let's see how these forces interlock.
I want you to imagine an economy. Let's use the Indonesian economy and the rupiah as our example here, as this set of massive interlocking gears. Supply, demand, and monetary policy, they aren't just isolated theories floating around in a vacuum somewhere. They are deeply connected. When the central bank turns that monetary policy gear, it directly forces the supply gear to move, which then physically meshes with the demand gear of the general public. So if even one of those gears gets stuck or starts spinning way too fast, the entire system feels the friction.
Moving right along to Section 2, the money supply, which is the fuel of our system.
So what exactly is the money supply? Well, it's technically defined as the monetary system's financial obligation to the domestic private sector, which I know sounds complicated, but it's really just a fancy textbook way of saying the general public. I want you to think of the money supply as the ammunition, the actual fuel moving through the system. It's the total amount of purchasing power that's out there, just waiting to be deployed into the economy at any given moment. Now, when you hear money supply, you probably picture giant movie vaults just overflowing with physical cash, right? Well, reality is actually pretty surprising. Physical cash, which is part of the highly liquid category we call M1, only makes up about 10.3% of the supply. No way, right? The vast majority, a staggering 70.3%, is what we call quasi-money in the broader M2 category. We're talking about things like time deposits and savings accounts. It's money that definitely exists, but it's parked. It's not instantly liquid cash. Understanding that most of our economic fuel is actually just sitting in digital and paper ledgers is absolutely crucial for seeing how the mechanic tunes the engine later on.
Okay, Section 3. Money demand. Let's talk about the engine.
To really understand this engine, we have to look at ourselves, human behavior. The legendary economist John Maynard Keynes pointed out something super profound. He said, "We don't demand money just to be wealthy. We actually demand it for liquidity." Think about it. If we only cared about wealth, we'd invest every single penny we had into assets to maximize our returns. But we don't do that. We keep cash on hand. We have these deep psychological and, frankly, highly rational motives to keep some of our fuel readily available. Keynes basically pinned down three core reasons why we stash cash. First is the transaction motive. You literally just need cash to buy groceries, pay for a train ticket, or keep a business running day to day. Second, the precautionary motive. Look, humans absolutely hate uncertainty. We hold on to cash to protect ourselves against a sudden illness or, say, an unexpected economic crisis. And third, the speculative motive. Sometimes you just hold on to cash because you're waiting for that perfect moment to invest, hoping to catch a really profitable wave.
Let's put these side by side to see how they react to different economic triggers. The transaction motive is actually very linear and predictable. It's driven almost entirely by your income level. If you make more money, you spend more on daily transactions. Makes sense, right? But the speculative motive, oh, that one is a whole different beast. It is highly complex and driven by interest rates and future expectations. If you think bond prices are going to drop or interest rates are going to rise, you're going to hoard your cash right now. It's basically a massive, constant psychological chess game happening across millions of people. And that is what makes up our demand engine.
Which brings us to Section 4, the central bank. Enter the mechanic.
So what goes down when the fuel supply and the public's demand get totally out of whack? The engine starts to sputter, or even worse, it overheats. And this is exactly where the central bank steps in as the mechanic. Monetary policy is essentially the action taken by the government through the central bank to influence the whole macroeconomic situation. By pulling various digital and policy levers, like adjusting reserve requirements or tweaking those interest rates, they try to fine-tune the amount of fuel in the system so the whole machine doesn't just break down.
And that brings us to a really fundamental rule. Picture a giant scale. This is what Indonesian economist Professor Dr. Budiano calls the law of equilibrium. The mechanic's main job is keeping this specific scale perfectly balanced, the supply of money on one side and the actual supply of goods on the other. If the mechanic pumps way too much fuel into the system, meaning the supply of money completely outweighs the actual goods available, the scale violently tips. Suddenly, you get a flashing red warning light. Inflation. The money loses its value because there's simply too much of it chasing too few actual things.
All right, Section 5, the 3 main goals. Let's take a look at the dashboard.
When the central bank mechanics are staring at their dashboard, they're really sweating over 3 main dials. First, controlling inflation, just like we talked about. They have to protect the public's purchasing power so prices don't spiral completely out of control. Second, reducing unemployment. By making sure enough fuel is flowing to the real sector, businesses can grow and hire, getting us closer to full employment. And third, stabilizing exchange rates. In our globalized world, keeping your currency steady against foreign currencies is absolutely vital for smooth international trade. Literally every lever the mechanic pulls is just a desperate attempt to keep these 3 dials in the green.
And finally, Section 6, the art of balance, where we bring this unified cycle together.
Here is the whole shebang mapped out step by step. Step 1 kicks off with the central bank adjusting a policy instrument. Step 2, that adjustment flows directly into the money supply, tweaking our levels of M1 and M2 fuel. Step 3, this freshly adjusted fuel interacts directly with the public's money demand. Those transactional, precautionary, and speculative motives we discussed. Step 4, if everything goes according to plan, the system hits price equilibrium, perfectly balancing money against goods. And finally, Step 5, those ultimate macro goals, stable inflation, low unemployment, and a strong currency are actually achieved. It is literally a continuous, never-ending feedback loop.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly important takeaway. Economics truly is the science of balance. Money itself, it's not absolute wealth. I mean, you can't eat it, you definitely can't build a house out of it. It is merely a tool. A successful monetary policy isn't about making as much money as humanly possible. It's this highly delicate art of keeping just enough fuel flowing to keep our daily transactions and our lives moving, but not so much that it actually destroys the value of everything we've worked to build. So next time you see a headline about the central bank changing interest rates, ask yourself, which side of the scale are they trying to balance today? Thanks so much for hanging out and watching this explainer.